Now, the war against Israel has brought out some real anti-Semites, and not just from some people, some, a minority in the Arab community, but also in the left. And I find it frightening. And I've shown you before what a senior official of Hamas, the terrorist group firing these 3,000 rockets at Israel, really wants done to the Jews. Here he is, just 2 weeks ago. This is the real Hamas, but try to get a Palestinian activist here on Sky to condemn this terrorist movement.
I'm no great fan, and I certainly don't think that it strategically works very well. But the cold hard fact is, I'd rather, if you do it in brute binary, a missile, and we saw the picture of the synagogue there, whilst it creates some terror, it's a little hole. A missile or an F-35 aeroplane, Apache helicopters. Israel's a nuclear-armed state. There is no parity when you talk about a conflict. I'm no fan of Hamas, but I really, really don't like Israel.
Oh, tactically, the terrorism, the 3,000 missiles, it doesn't work. Tactically. I'm not saying that activist, by the way, is anti-Semitic. I just think he's too tolerant of a terrorist group, maybe, but it's not anti-Semitic. But I cannot say the same of the Palestinian in Toronto who beat up an elderly Jewish man with sticks, or the Palestinian protesters in Germany on the weekend who attacked police with rocks and bottles and sticks, and also heckled and then threw a firecracker at a Jewish journalist covering the protest. And in Britain, even more shocking scenes. Palestinian supporters driving through London, calling on their speakers for Jewish girls to be raped. You've got to ask why violence and menace is something I think we probably seem to expect from anti-Israel protests, but is something that journalists would seem to excuse, as they never would if it came from Jews instead. Joining me from London is Brendan O'Neill, editor of the online magazine Spiked. Brendan, a pro-Palestinian rally in London calling for the rape of Jewish women and girls, a few bad eggs, or something actually symbolic of the hatred that is now driving this war on Israel?
Well, it was just such a repugnant act that you showed there. People in the UK are really shocked by this. People driving through a part of London, a part of North London that has a very large Jewish population, screaming abuse at Jews, calling for the rape of Jewish women and Jewish girls. And this is not an isolated incident. A few days ago in Norwich, in England, someone put racist graffiti using the K word that is used to describe Jews. They put that on a synagogue in Norwich. We've also seen in Germany, stones have been thrown at synagogues. A fire was started in Dusseldorf on top of the monument to the Grand Synagogue that was burnt down during Kristallnacht. And we've seen in Belgium and France and Germany, we've seen people chanting about the slaughter of the Jews. So this is becoming quite common in Europe, where when there is an outburst of anti-Israel sentiment, it is accompanied by anti-Jewish racism. And I think the line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is becoming thinner all the time, and activists really need to ask themselves why that is happening.
They should at least consider that the hatred they're seeing on the streets of Europe against Jews might be magnified and is exactly the hatred that's driving the people in Palestine, some, to destroy Israel now. This is the real issue here. Now, I wonder, Brenda, why the left is now so united in hating Israel. And I wonder whether it's because all sorts of leftist isms have sort of coalesced and focused on this one people. It is because the Jewish Israel is capitalistic, is rich, is successful, is Western and overwhelmingly white, while Palestinians are more socialist in tendency. They're poorer, they're Eastern, not Western, and they're brown.
I think that's exactly right. I think what's happened is that Israel has become the whipping boy of the woke elites. You know, they project all their fury and hatred and their prejudices onto this one country. They hold Israel up as being super symbolic of the West. And of course, they are very anti-West. They see Israel as modern. It is pro-borders. It is very interested, of course, in protecting its borders, in protecting its people. It is seen as a progressive country. It's seen as an arrogant country. It is seen as, you know, symbolizing all the things that are bad about Western society and Western politics. And so what's happened is that across the West, all these woke leftists have projected all their bile onto Israel. And that is why it often does cross the line from being normal protesting into being something a bit more hateful. I mean, when Turkey drops bombs on Kurdish communities, you never see these kinds of protests or this kind of fury or this kind of obsession. We never hear from the left, very rarely anyway, about the Uyghurs in China and what's happening to them. It's always Israel that gets them raging and furious and on the streets burning flags. So there's something very odd about their view of Israel, and it's becoming not just odd, but a bit prejudicial as well.
Yeah, I sort of see Israel as in the, you know, the canary in the coal mine of Western civilization. Now, you said it's something odd about it. Is this a clue to what's going on at the FA Cup final on the weekend? We saw players bend the knee to Black Lives Matter. A number of spectators booed. And when Leicester won their cup, two players waved and carried the Palestinian flag, one born in France to a Muslim family from Mali, the other born in Britain to a Bangladeshi Muslim family. What do you take from that?
I think it's quite worrying, actually. I mean, I'm very much in favour of freedom of speech, and I think people should be able to say what they want and wave whatever flags they want. I would actually prefer, however, if football wasn't being so relentlessly politicised. I don't think it's surprising at all that some fans booed the taking of the knee, because football fans are sick and tired of being lectured about what is the correct woke point of view that they must all hold. And I think what's happening with some foreign-born people in Western Europe in particular, the thing that worries me is that some of them are adopting the Palestinian cause as a kind of way of signalling their distance from the communities that they now live in, as a way of saying, I'm not really part of the West. I align myself more with Palestine than I do with the United Kingdom or France or Belgium or wherever else it might be. I'm worried that the Palestinian cause is now being folded into the ideology of multiculturalism and is deepening tensions and divisions in the West as well as in the Middle East. And I think we've got to keep a very close eye so that that kind of thing doesn't spin out of control.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And if the FA Cup people, they promote race identity politics at the start of the game, they can hardly be surprised when players freelance on the same theme at the end of the game. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.